Charleston's summer light had a way of softening everything it touched. The hedges looked fuller, the old stone fountains seemed warmer, and even the laughter drifting across the Whitmore estate carried a kind of lacquered gloss, polished, performative, curated for the elite audience gathered there. Evan Carter arrived 10 minutes late. Though no one noticed, he rarely drew attention, at least not in the way people at these events valued. He wasn't flamboyant, wealthy by inheritance, or naturally captivating. He was simply present, occupying space as quietly as the architecture he designed for a living. The garden party was already in full swing, strings of warm lights crisscrossed above the lawn. A jazz trio murmured notes into the humid air, and servers in crisp white shirts drifted between clusters of guests like polite ghosts. Evan adjusted the cuff of his shirt and scanned the crowd for his wife. He found her near the rose archway, Lena Whitmore Carter, radiant in a soft champagne dress that caught the sunlight in subtle ripples. People gravitated toward her effortlessly. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her belonging. She fit into this world, the world of old Charleston families and new money elites, like someone born knowing exactly how to stand, laugh, and command attention. Evan approached with a gentle smile. "Sorry I'm late." There was traffic on. Lena cut him off with a glance, the kind that lasted only half a second, but said more than words. "Not now. Don't embarrass me." She returned to her conversation before he could finish. Evan sank into the background, as he often did, offering tight smiles and polite nods. He accepted a glass of white wine from a passing server and found himself standing just outside the circle of people surrounding his wife. Then it happened. Lena lifted her wine glass theatrically, tilting her head back in a way that signaled she had an announcement, one she expected the crowd to welcome. She extended her left hand, wiggled her fingers, and with a careless flourish, she slid her wedding ring off. "Guess I'm single today," she laughed. The group erupted in amused cheers. Someone yoked. "About time you took a break." "Lena," another said, "let the poor woman breathe. Evan doesn't own you." Evan's breath caught. His fingers tightened around his glass. The laughter blurred into static. Lena twirled the ring between her fingers, smiling as if she just shared something harmless and cute, a flirtatious anecdote among friends. Her gaze flickered toward Evan for barely a second, then away, dismissing him entirely. He felt a slow, cold pressure spreading through his chest. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even anger yet. It was something far worse, humiliation that wrapped around him like a second skin. A woman standing beside him leaned in and whispered sympathetically, "Don't take it personally. Lena loves an audience." But the comment only deepened the ache, because he did take it personally. How could he not? This wasn't a private joke whispered between partners who understood each other. It was a public declaration, one meant to entertain, to signal something. Though Evan couldn't grasp what, he didn't storm off. He didn't confront her. He simply stepped back, retreating toward the quieter side of the lawn, where an old oak cast a cool shadow. He needed space. Air. Distance, anything to keep his expression from cracking into something the guests could gossip about. From under the oak, he watched Lena laugh, tucking her hair behind her ear in that graceful, practiced motion he once adored. The ring she twirled gleamed mockingly each time it caught the light. He remembered the night he'd placed that ring on her finger. The vows, the trembling excitement, the belief that it meant they were building something real, something solid. But standing there now, he saw how fragile that belief had always been. Someone approached her cousin Amelia, sympathetic but cautious, as though speaking to a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Evan, you okay?" He nodded automatically. "Just needed some air." Amelia hesitated. "Lena's been different lately. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but maybe you should talk to her." Talk to her? As if he hadn't tried. As if conversations hadn't turned into cold wars. Silences. Awe. Dismissius. Evan watched as Lena clinked glasses with a tall man he didn't recognize. She laughed again. Louder this time. Something inside him shifted, not anger. Not yet, but a quiet, Dawning awareness. A recognition that the woman he married wasn't the woman standing under the rose archway anymore. Or maybe she never had been. The party continued to sparkle and thrum around him, but he heard none of it. The laughter, the music, the polite conversations became a distant hum as he stared at the small bare space on Lena's finger where her ring used to be. A space that suddenly felt like a metaphor, a space where their marriage used to live. When the string lights flickered overhead and the sky deepened into a soft twilight blue, Evan finally exhaled. The realization settled heavy and inevitable. Something had broken tonight, and he wasn't sure it could be fixed. The night after the garden party, Evan lay awake in the dim bedroom they shared. Or rather, the room they once shared. The ceiling fan hummed softly, slicing through the humid Charleston air, but nothing eased the tightness in his chest. Lena slept on her side, her back turned to him, as she had for months now. He watched the rise and fall of her breathing, steady and indifferent. If someone walked into the room, they would think this was a peaceful marriage, a quiet night, a couple simply tired after hosting a large event. But beneath that stillness was a history of cracks, the kind so thin they began as barely visible hairlines, but over time branched out, widening, deepening, turning into fractures that could no longer be ignored. The mind has its own way of rewinding when pain demands an explanation, and Evans rewound whether he wanted it to or not. They had met 9 years earlier in Savannah at a coastal preservation gala, an event Evan nearly skipped. He went because a colleague wanted company, and Lena went because her mother insisted. She had walked in late, wind in her hair from the river breeze, carrying a confidence that seemed too bright for the dim-lit hall. She wasn't loud, but she drew attention with an effortless magnetism. When they spoke for the first time, Evan remembered thinking, I didn't know people like her really existed. People who seemed to glow from the inside, who made the world bend slightly toward them. For years, they lived as though destiny had orchestrated their meeting. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, evenings by the pier, shared dreams of building a home full of warmth and possibility. Lena softened around him then. She was playful, curious, hungry for a future they designed together. Back then, she used to hold his hand and say, "You steady me. Evan, you make all of this make sense." Those words lived inside him for years, until slowly, nearly imperceptibly, everything began to shift. The first crack appeared the year Lena's father passed away. She withdrew, folding inward, emotionally, clutching the Whitmore family expectations more tightly than ever. The Whitmore estate, the family friends, the parties. It was as though she retreated into a version of herself Evan didn't recognize. "He would have wanted me to take over more family duties," she said one night, after snapping at him for asking if she wanted to stay home instead of attending another fundraiser. Her voice trembled, but not with grief, with irritation. Evan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. That moment stuck with him, not because of the rejection, but because he saw fear in her eyes, fear of failing the world she inherited. Crack. Months later came the late nights. "I'm going over numbers with my uncle. It's complicated. Evan, I don't want to bore you with the details." Her tone was clipped, transactional. She used to tell him everything, even the boring things. He would sit on the couch, half listening, watching her talk with her hands the way she always did when she was passionate about something. But now, she guarded her phone. She turned the screen away from him when messages popped up. She changed her passcode, something she'd never done before. When he asked why, she smiled tightly. "Everyone's doing it now. It's safer." A generic answer, a non-answer. Crack. Then came the social distance, the kind that happens in public first. At dinners with friends, she began interrupting him, correcting him, finishing his sentences with versions that made her sound smarter, and him smaller. Once, he slipped up on the name of a historic Charleston district while talking to a guest. Lena laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Evan's terrible with local names. I keep telling him he needs a refresher." Their friends laughed. Evan laughed too, the safe laugh of someone trying not to make a scene. But inside, another quiet fissure formed. Crack. By the start of the year, the intimacy was gone, physical and emotional. Evan tried to rationalize its stress, grief, expectations, the Whitmore reputation weighing on her shoulders. He told himself she needed space. He told himself love demanded patience. He told himself that the Lena he met soft, warm, vulnerable was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of duty and pressure. He held on to that belief with both hands, but every so often, he'd catch her looking at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, something resembling disappointment. He never asked her why. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. The coldness deepened, spilling into their home. She started sleeping on her side of the bed a few inches farther than before. Then a foot, then nearly at the edge. She worked late, showered separately, filled her evenings with tasks he wasn't invited into. One night, Evan cooked her favorite pasta after a long week, the one with lemon cream and basil she used to request on stressful days. She took 2 bites, sat her fork down, and said, "I'm not in the mood for heavy food anymore, but thanks." No eye contact, no softness, no recognition of the man trying so hard to reach her. Crack. The worst part wasn't the coldness. It was the secrecy wrapped inside it. He knew something was changing, but he didn't know what. Why did she recoil when he brushed her shoulder in the kitchen? Why did she prefer being around people who saw him as nothing more than her quiet, forgettable husband? Why did she seem restless at home, but alive at parties? He searched for answers in her behavior, but everything slipped through his fingers. The only constant was her ring always on her finger, always glowing under the lights of every event they attended. The ring she swore she'd never take off, until the garden party, until the moment she removed it, held it up like a prop, and laughed as though their marriage was a costume she could shrug off whenever it didn't fit the aesthetic. That, more than anything, revealed the bruised truth. The cracks weren't new. They had been growing for years. He just kept pretending not to see them. At 3:17 a.m., Evan finally turned onto his back, staring into the darkness. Lena shifted slightly, still asleep, her breathing steady. On the nightstand beside her, her ring sat in a small ceramic dish carelessly, casually, as though it meant nothing at all. The sight hollowed him. Once, that ring symbolized forever. Now, it symbolized something else entirely. A marriage slowly slipping out of her hands, and he was the only one still trying to hold it together. The morning after the garden party, Evan moved through the kitchen in a muted haze. As though the world had turned slightly underwater, light streamed through the tall windows of their Charleston home, warm, gentle, indifferent, falling across the marble counters. Lena insisted they renovate last year. He poured coffee for both of them out of habit, though he already knew she wouldn't drink hers. Lena entered moments later, sunglasses perched on her head despite being indoors. Her hair was perfectly brushed, her dress crisp. She looked as though she was heading to brunch. Not simply getting ready for another day. Morning, she said, tone flat but polite. It was the kind of greeting one offers a coworker, not a husband. Evan waited for some acknowledgement of the previous night. A joke, an apology, a quick explanation, anything. But she simply picked up her phone, began typing, and walked past him. The crack from last night widened. In the weeks that followed, it wasn't one dramatic incident that shifted everything. It was the small ones, the tiny inconsistencies that, alone, seemed meaningless. But together, they formed a mosaic Evan could no longer ignore. It started with the late-night calls. He'd wake up around 1 a.m. to the faint sound of Lena's voice drifting down the hallway, soft, low, hurried. When he approached the room, the talking stopped abruptly. "Oh, it's just my uncle," she'd say without looking at him. "Family stuff." But the tone she used, sharp, tight. Not at all like the formal way she spoke to her. Relatives didn't fit the explanation. And she never put the phone on speaker anymore. He started to notice new patterns, Whenever he entered the room, her phone would flip face down. Notifications vanished before he could glimpse them. Her laugh changed lighter and warmer when she looked at the screen than when she looked at him. Absences grew too. She began leaving the house early, hours before work. Errands, she always said. You don't want the boring details. Sometimes she came home late. Sometimes she didn't come home until nearly midnight, entering quietly, tiptoeing the way someone does when they don't want accountability. Evan asked once work ran late. She hesitated just long enough to fracture the truth. Then, something like that. Something like that. Those three words echoed in him for days. The irritability came next. He noticed it first in the small interactions. Did you move my planner? No, I haven't touched it. Well, someone did. Or, why didn't you remind me about dinner with my mother? You said you didn't want to go. That doesn't mean you shouldn't remind me. Conversations became minefields. Even his silence annoyed her. Even his kindness seemed to offend her. The strangest part was the way she switched back and forth depending on who watched. In public, she was poised, affectionate. Even, she would slip her hand around his arm when entering a restaurant, smile fondly when a friend complimented them, rest her head lightly against his shoulder during photos. But once they were alone in the car, the warmth evaporated instantly, like mist cleared by sunlight. You didn't have to tell that story about our trip. She said one night after leaving a dinner, you seemed embarrassed. Evan replied quietly. I wasn't embarrassed. She snapped. I just prefer privacy. You never consider what image we project. Image. There was that word again, a word that seemed to matter more to her than anything else. He wondered when their marriage became a brand she felt responsible for. One evening, after another tense dinner with her extended family, Evan noticed Lena lingering near the door as guests left. She leaned in close to a man he'd seen before, one of her mother's business acquaintances, tall and impeccably groomed. The man touched Lena's arm briefly. In a lingering, familiar way, Lena didn't pull back. Later in the car, Evan said nothing. He wasn't sure if silence made him weak or simply broke. She stared out the window as if the passing streetlights were more worth her time. Patterns kept forming, unmistakable once seen. At a small charity event, Lena introduced him to a group of guests as Evan Carter, the architect, rather than my husband. Evan. Not once did she mention being his wife. Then, during a luncheon with her friends, a group who floated through life on inherited trust funds and carefully curated aesthetics, one of them joked Lena, "You're practically single with how much you're working these days." Lena only laughed. She didn't correct them. Not even with a playful, "Hardly I'm married to him." Evan felt something inside him detach slightly, like a button coming loose on a shirt he'd worn too long. At home, the illusion broke entirely. Their conversations reduced to logistical exchanges. There's a package coming tomorrow. I'll be out late. Don't wait up. We need to finalize the renovation plans. Can you pick up the dry cleaning? No emotion, no curiosity, no shared life. Whenever Evan tried to ask if something was wrong, really wrong, she dismissed it. You overthink everything. Stop imagining problems. Not everything has to be dramatic. Evan. But she never looked him in the eyes when she said those things. He wondered if she feared he would see through her. Or worse, that she didn't care if he did. One night, everything came into sharp focus. They were at a small birthday dinner for one of her friends. Seated at a long candlelit table, the conversation drifted from travel to fashion to gossip, Lena's natural territory. She was vibrant around them, smiling effortlessly, laughing with a clarity Evan hadn't heard in months. Then someone said jokingly, "Lena, you're glowing. Married life must be treating you well." Lena scoffed, a small sound, but devastating. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please. Married life is just a formality at this point. The table laughed. Evan swallowed. The wine in his glass suddenly tasted metallic. He watched Lena raise her glass, basking in the attention, in the freedom she claimed with her words. That was the moment he realized she wasn't hiding the cracks. She was widening them, and she didn't care who saw Later that night, in the quiet of their bedroom, he finally spoke. "Lena," he said softly, "are you trying to push me away?" She didn't respond immediately. She continued removing her earrings, placing them meticulously in their velvet case. She removed her lipstick with clinical precision, wiped her face, washed her hands. Only then did she turn toward him. Her expression was unreadable, but cold enough to sting. "Not everything is about you, Evan," she said. "Some of us have lives outside this house." She turned off the vanity light. The room dimmed. Evan felt something shift again. A deeper, more permanent crack. One that felt dangerously close to breaking open. It happened on a Thursday evening, ordinary in every visible way, yet destined to redefine everything Evan believed about his marriage. The Whitmore estate was set to host another weekend event, and Lena insisted they stop by her mother's house to discuss preparations. Evan didn't want to go. The weight of the past few months pressed on him like a wet coat he couldn't remove. But Lena asked in that clipped, obligatory tone. She reserved for expectations, masked as requests. So he went. The Whitmore mansion stood just outside Charleston, lit by soft lanterns that cast elegant shadows across the long veranda. The smell of gardenia drifted in the air, the smell that once reminded Evan of spring evenings with Lena, but now only reminded him of distance. Inside, he was greeted by muted laughter from deeper in the house. Lena barely looked at him as she said, "Mother's in the sunroom. I'll handle this. Wait here for a moment." She disappeared down the hallway before he could respond. Evan wandered toward the formal living area, intending to pour himself water or simply sit until she returned. But as he passed the corridor outside the sunroom, something made him stop. Voices. Lena's among them, bright, animated in a way she hadn't been with him in months. He didn't mean to listen, but then he heard his name. An instinct is stronger than intention. He froze, and then he just stood there. Lena's voice floated through the doorway, laced with a laughter Evan recognized too well. The high, performative kind she used at parties. "You should have seen his face when I took the ring off. Honestly, I thought he'd finally grow a backbone." Another female voice, her mother's, unmistakably sharp, chimed in. "Lena, darling, I told you long ago, Avon is too soft. He lets you do whatever you want. Men like that don't keep up with women in our circles." A third voice, one of Lena's friends, added lightly. "Still, the timing was perfect. Taking off the ring right before that photo. God, the symbolism." Everyone noticed. They laughed. Laughed. Evan's heart lurched. His vision blurred for a moment. He stepped closer quietly, carefully unable to stop himself. Inside the sunroom, the women lounged with glasses of wine, the late afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. Lena looked relaxed, legs crossed, her expression carefree in a way she never was around him anymore. "You rehearsed that laugh, didn't you?" her friend teased. Lena smirked. "Of course I did. You can't just improvise something like that. It had to look natural." Evan's stomach dropped. She rehearsed it. The laugh she gave when she removed her wedding ring at the party, the laugh that felt like a knife sliding between his ribs, wasn't a spontaneous expression of frustration or exhaustion. It was planned humiliation. Her mother sipped her wine, and his reaction, "Predictable," Lena replied. He froze. Like always. "Does he suspect anything?" Her friend whispered. A pause. Evan felt the blood drain from his face. Then Lena. "He suspects something, but not the right thing." Evan always looks for the emotional explanation. He keeps thinking I'm stressed or distant or grieving. He never considers the real reason. Her mother nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep it that way until you're ready." Ready for what Evan's hand gripped the doorframe. His pulse hammered in his ears. Lena continued. Voice lowering, but still edged with scorn. "Honestly, I just want him to feel it. The imbalance. The way I felt trapped by this marriage. By his expectations. By the way he clings. He needs to understand he never really had me the way he thought he did. Her friend exhaled softly. Lena, that's cold. Lena shrugged. He made it easy. The words struck like a slap. Made it easy. By loving her, by trusting her, by believing in the promises she once whispered to him on nights when the world felt small. And theirs, Evan's breath faltered. The room spun. Footsteps approached from inside. A shadow moved. He stepped back quickly, slipping behind a wide column just as Lena walked out into the hallway. She didn't see him. Her phone buzzed. She checked it instantly, smiling faintly before typing a response. A smile he hadn't seen in months. Not once. Someone else had access to that version of her now. She walked away, heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. Evan stood frozen behind the column long after she disappeared. Not because he feared being caught, but because he felt the world he'd been clinging to crumble in silence around him. Her laugh wasn't careless. Her coldness wasn't accidental. Her distance wasn't grief or stress. It had all been intentional, calculated, cruel. He had spent months telling himself stories to protect her image, stories about stress, family pressure, emotional withdrawal, anything that painted her as hurting rather than heartless. But the truth was simple and devastating. She wanted him small. She wanted him off balance. She wanted him humiliated. And she had been rehearsing how to hurt him. Evan walked out onto the veranda, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. The night breeze brushed against his face. Carrying the scent of damp wood and gardenia, he inhaled slowly. Then again, and again, something inside him, something quiet and loyal and patient, shifted, cracked, and began to fall away. For the first time since the deterioration of their marriage had begun, a new thought surfaced. Maybe this wasn't my failure. Maybe this was her choice. The realization hurt, but it also awakened something long dormant inside him. Clarity. Treacherous, liberating clarity. Behind him, through the glass doors, he heard Lena's soft laughter again. That same rehearsed laugh she used so easily, so willingly. When the target was him, this time, he didn't flinch. He listened. He absorbed. And something cold and steady formed in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. But the quiet prelude to resolve. He turned, walked down the veranda steps, and stepped into the shadows of the yard. For the first time in months, he didn't feel lost. I felt awakened. Evan didn't sleep the night after the garden party. He lay in the dark guest room, the one Lena jokingly called his snoring cave, but the joke had stopped being funny months ago. The ceiling above him felt like a weight. His breathing came shallow, uneven, as though his own body refused to accept what his mind already knew. By dawn, a thin, winter-gray light seeped through the blinds. It illuminated the room with the same coldness that had settled in his chest. He hadn't cried. He was past that now. There was only the quiet, precise ache of betrayal, sharp enough to cut, familiar enough to numb. Down the hall, Lena's soft footsteps echoed. She always moved with a dancer's grace, even in silence. She paused outside the guest room, but didn't open the door. For a second, Evan wondered if she was listening for movement or simply confirming his distance. Either possibility hurt. At 7:13 a.m., she finally spoke. "We're leaving for the fundraiser at 5. Wear the Navy suit. It photographs better. No good morning. No acknowledgement of last night. No apology for stripping her ring off in front of 50 guests and calling herself single today. Just instructions." As if he were staff. As if he were furniture. As if he were no one. Evan sat up slowly, the words scraping through his mind with a sickening clarity. God, she really doesn't care. Later that morning, he found himself staring at the framed photo on the mantel, a picture from their second year of marriage. Lena's arm looped around his, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her smile soft, unguarded. Back then, she still laughed with him. Not at him. She still leaned into him at parties. Not away. He remembered that day vividly. She had burned the pancakes. They'd laughed about it. And she insisted he take the picture. Because I want a morning like this on the wall forever. The woman in that photo felt like a ghost. Now, someone he'd loved. Someone he'd lost. Someone Lana had buried without telling him. He placed the frame face down. He couldn't bear her eyes on him anymore, not even the older, kinder version of her. That afternoon, Evan found a misplaced scarf in the laundry room, expensive, perfumed. Not hers. He lifted it, inhaled, and felt the blood drain from his face. He'd smelled that fragrance at the party. On her, on him, a memory hit him like cold water poured down his spine. At the garden party, Lena had walked off toward the pergola with a man. Evan didn't know a man with 2 white teeth and a blazer too casual for the event. Evan had thought nothing of it at the time. Had trusted her. That simple, tragic trust. The scarf fell from his hands. This wasn't emotional distance. This wasn't mood swings or exhaustion. This wasn't the slow fade of a troubled marriage. This was planned. Deliberate. Cruel. The laughter she gave that night, the bright, sharp, too loud laugh when she said, "Guess I'm single today," hadn't been impulsive or careless. It had been choreography, a performance, a signal, a public declaration that she had already stepped out of the marriage and wanted the world to know. The sound of her laughter replayed in his mind, distorted now, tinged with malice. When Lena finally stepped into the kitchen near sunset, her hair sleek, her dress immaculate, her phone in hand, she didn't bother meeting his eyes. "We should leave soon," she said while typing something, her thumb flying. "They expect us at 7 sharp." "Us?" he repeated. His voice came out hoarse. She didn't look up. "Yes. Us. Obviously. Don't make this weird." He let out a breathless laugh. One that wasn't really a laugh at all. "I'm not the one who made anything weird." "Lena." That made her pause. But only for a second. Annoyance flashed over her face. Not guilt. Never guilt. Her expression had the cold beauty of polished marble. "Evan," she sighed. "If this is about last night, don't be dramatic." It was a joke. People laughed. It lightened the mood. "It wasn't a joke," he said quietly. "You meant it." Her lips twitched half smirk, half dismissal. "You're reading too much into everything these days." He stepped closer. "Whose scarf is it that wiped the expression clean off her face?" Just for a moment. Just long enough. Then her eyes hardened. "Don't play detective." "So I'm right," he whispered. Lena rolled her eyes. Sharp and impatient, like he was inconveniencing her with his pain. "You're exhausting. Evan. This is exactly why I—" She stopped herself. "Why you—" "What?" he asked. Silence. He saw her swallow. Saw her mind working. Not searching for honesty, but crafting a more palatable lie. A social-friendly version of the truth. "You know what she said?" Grabbing her purse. "I don't want to do this." "Do what?" "This. Emotional interrogation. You've suddenly decided to adopt. You want to talk. Fine. Later. After the fundraiser. I'm not ruining my night because you're insecure." A slow numbness spread through his limbs. Insecure. That was the word she always used to shut him down. A blade disguised as concern. "How long have you been gone?" he asked. She froze. "Don't be ridiculous." Emotionally. "How long?" A beat. Another. Then Lena's face shifted, something cold and final and merciless emerging. "Evan, I haven't been in this marriage for a long time. You know that." His chest constricted. "And the party? The ring? Oh, God," she groaned. "Not this again. Listen, people are bored. They love a little drama. It makes me relatable." Relatable. The word made him dizzy. "So you used me?" he said softly. Lena exhaled sharply. "I used our marriage. Evan. There's a difference." Something inside him cracked silently. Deeply. The kind of break that doesn't heal back into the same shape. He looked at her. Really looked. And realized he didn't recognize this woman. Not anymore. Maybe he hadn't for a long time. Lena adjusted her earrings. checked her reflection in the microwave door, and said with infuriating nonchalance, "Try not to look miserable tonight. It reflects poorly on both of us." Then she walked out of the room. And Evan finally understood the full truth. She hadn't simply abandoned the marriage. She had weaponized it. Publicly. Proudly. And he had been the prop in her show. Outside. Her car engine started. Inside. Evan's world stopped. He wasn't sure how long he stood there. Gripping the counter. Breath shaking. Floor. Tilting beneath him. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity, clearer than anything he had felt in years. This marriage had already ended. She had just chosen to end it without telling him. Or maybe she had told him, just not with words. With a laugh. With a ring tossed into a stranger's hand. With a scarf that didn't belong to her. The betrayal wasn't a moment. It was a message. And he had finally heard it. The house changed first. Not dramatically. Not in any way someone from the outside would notice. But to Evan, the shift was immediate. So stark it felt physical. The silence deepened. The air grew heavier. The rooms themselves seemed to recoil from him, as if too ashamed to witness the slow unraveling of his life. Lena stayed out that night, returning home, long past midnight. Evan didn't ask where she'd been. The answer, spoken or unspoken, would destroy whatever fragile pieces of him remained. He lay awake in the dark, listening to her heels click across the hardwood floor, then fall silent as she closed the bedroom door behind her. She didn't check the guest room. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't even pause. She moved through the house like he no longer existed. In the morning, Evan stood in the kitchen, clutching a mug he hadn't taken a sip from. The steam had disappeared long ago. The coffee was cold. His hands felt colder. A pan sat drying by the sink. Lena must have made breakfast for herself. She hadn't left anything for him, not a plate, not a note, not a trace. He found himself staring at the small pool of water under the pan, the way it spread slowly across the countertop. It reminded him of something leaking, something dripping out and disappearing. Was that what their marriage had been? A slow leak he'd ignored until the floor rotted beneath him. He placed the mug down gently, as if afraid even the smallest noise would shatter the fragile quiet. Over the next few days, Evan moved through the house like a ghost. He eased doors shut instead of closing them, lowered the television volume until he could barely hear it, walked with a softness that felt unnatural. He didn't want to disturb anything, not even the emptiness. The living room was the worst. He found himself standing in front of the mantel often, staring at the collection of framed photographs Lena had curated over the years, pictures arranged to portray a perfect life, a perfect marriage, a magazine spread of mutual happiness. He wondered how many of those smiles were real, how many were hers, how many were his, how many belonged to neither of them. His gaze drifted to the photo he'd turned face down the day before. Eventually, he lifted it again. There they were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, sunlight pouring through the window behind them. A frozen moment from a time when hope still felt natural, when he believed love could hold against anything. How naive, he thought, gently tracing the outline of her face on the glass. He placed the frame back down, this time face down intentionally. He couldn't look at their ghosts anymore. Lena wasn't cruel in the loud, obvious way people warn you about. She didn't yell, didn't insult him, didn't mock him to his face. Instead, she dismantled him through absence, through indifference, through the quiet certainty that she no longer counted him as part of her life. She came home late. She left early. She spoke in clipped sentences, if she spoke at all. Some nights Evan heard her laughter from the patio, soft, private, meant for someone on the other end of her phone. Not him, never him. And each night, the harder truth gnawed at him. He had been the only one trying, only one tending the marriage, only one believing in second chances, only one fighting for a future she had walked away from long ago. Every sign had been there. He had simply chosen blindness. One evening, Evan stood at the threshold of their bedroom. He didn't enter. He couldn't. The space felt sacred once, now poisoned. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air. But instead of comfort, it brought a tightening in his throat. Her vanity was cluttered with skincare bottles, jewelry trays, and a perfume she hadn't worn in years. She'd switched scents recently. Something new, something that didn't belong to the version of her he had known. The bed was made perfectly. Lena-style hospital corners, crisp lines, an arrangement of decorative pillows. He always messed up. She used to tease him for it. Now she slept on only one side of the bed, leaving the other untouched, cold, as if waiting for someone else, or as if making space for the absence she preferred. Evan backed out of the doorway. He wasn't wanted there. He wasn't wanted anywhere. At work. People noticed the change in him. His students at the design school whispered after class, concerned that their once energetic instructor now seemed distracted, drained. His colleagues asked if he was sleeping enough, eating enough, living at all. He lied. He told them he was fine. People believed it because it was easier. Every drive back home filled him with the same dread, the dread of returning to a life where he was invisible. Late one night, Evan sat alone on the living room couch, wrapped in the darkness. The house hummed quietly, the refrigerator clicking on and off, the distant sound of a car driving by. He stared at the blank TV screen, seeing his reflection faintly, tired eyes, stubbled jaw, shoulders slumped. A man unraveling thread by thread. He whispered into the quiet. What did I do wrong? The house didn't answer. It never would. Because the truth was cruel and simple. He hadn't done anything wrong. She had simply stopped loving him. And she hadn't bothered to tell him. Days blended into nights. Nights blurred into something gray and endless. He stopped checking his phone because there were never messages from her. He stopped waiting for her key in the door because the times she did come home, she didn't come for him. Every room reminded him not of what he lost, but of everything he had never truly been allowed to have. A wife who saw him, a partner who chose him, a marriage that was more than a polished image. He realized something devastating. He had been lonely long before the laughter at the garden party. He had been alone while standing right next to her. The recognition settled into his bones, heavy and unmovable. Fallout wasn't explosive. Fallout was quiet, slow, suffocating, and Evan was buried under it. The confrontation did not arrive with shouting, broken dishes, or slamming doors. It arrived the same way the fallout had quietly, like a storm that had already destroyed everything, but returned anyway to finish the job. It happened on a Thursday evening. After Lena canceled yet another event at the last minute, she walked into the house shortly after 7, heels in one hand, phone clasped in the other. Her makeup was smudged, not from tears. Evan could tell, but from exhaustion or carelessness or both. She didn't notice him sitting on the couch at first. The lights were low, and Evan hadn't bothered to turn on the lamp beside him. He watched her move around the entryway, dropping her purse with a dull thud, towing off her shoes as though shedding the day, and him at the same time. When she finally looked up and saw him, she flinched slightly. "Oh," she said. "You're home." Something in her tone surprise, maybe even annoyance, tightened around his chest. "Where else would I be?" he asked. Lena forced a small smile, the performative kind she used at charity events. I didn't realize you'd be sitting there in the dark." He didn't answer right away. He let the silence expand, slow and deliberate. For the first time in a long time, she shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Lena," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Her jaw tightened. "I'm tired," she replied. "Can we not?" "No." He cut in, gently but firmly. "We're out of time for later." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then sighed in resignation. "Fine. What do you want to talk about us?" Her eyes flicked away. He gestured toward the armchair across from him. She hesitated before sitting, crossing her legs and folding her arms. A barrier, a shield. Evan studied her for a long moment, memorizing the face he once knew better than his own. Something in her looked older, colder. Or maybe it was simply the first time he truly saw her without the haze of hope. When did you stop loving me? He asked. Lena blinked. Once. Twice. Something darted across her expression: guilt. Irritation? Is pain? But vanished before it could settle. That's not a fair question, she whispered. It's the only one I have left. She looked down at her hands. I don't know. Evan. Does it matter? We've been growing apart for years. I didn't feel it, he said. I know, she replied quietly. That was part of the problem. He frowned. Explain. She inhaled sharply, her posture stiffening. You don't see things. Evan, you see what you want to see. You build this perfect little world in your head and expect me to live in it. He stared at her, stunned. A world where we were happy. A world where I didn't get to be anything except the version of me that made you feel safe. Her voice trembled not with sadness, but with long-buried resentment. You always made it sound like love meant stability, she said. Like being married meant being grateful. Predictable. Good. His throat tightened. I never asked you to be someone else. No, she admitted. You didn't. But you expected me to stay someone I no longer was. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead as though fighting off a headache. Do you know what it's like? She continued. To feel yourself changing but know your partner wants everything to remain exactly the same. To feel trapped by someone else's idea of who you're supposed to be. I felt like I was suffocating. Evan's fingers curled against the couch cushion. So you left me emotionally. I tried, she said. I tried to tell you. You didn't want to hear it. He swallowed hard. And taking off your ring, calling yourself single at the party, humiliating me in front of everyone, that wasn't about humiliating you, she said, though the wavering in her voice betrayed her. It was about letting myself breathe. Every time I wore that ring, I felt anchored to something I didn't want anymore. And I was that anchor. She didn't deny it. The silence grew thick between them. Evan's voice cracked. You could have told me. Lena, you could have said you were unhappy. I know, she whispered. And I didn't. I was cowardly. She looked at him finally, really looked. And for a moment he saw the woman he once loved. Lost. Scarred. And hurting in ways he hadn't known to look for. But then the moment passed, and he recognized that this version of her wasn't coming back. You treated me like a prop, Evan said. Someone to stand next to you so your life looked flawless from the outside. Her lips parted. She didn't deny that either. I'm sorry, she said. But the words sounded thin, misshapen, inadequate. I never meant for things to get this bad. But they did, he replied. Because you walked away long before I realized I was alone. Lena flinched. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. But she blinked them back. She wasn't the crying type, not for him. At least. What happens now? She asked. Evan looked around the dim living room, the place where they had once dreamed of building a future. Now it felt like a mausoleum for a marriage that had been dead long before the garden party. I don't know, he said honestly. But we can't keep living like this. She nodded slowly, as if the weight of the truth finally settled onto her shoulders. For the first time, Lena looked afraid. Not of him, not of consequences, but of what it meant to finally face the wreckage they had created together and separately. Avon stood. I need time. And space. Real space. Lena's voice came out fragile. Where will you go? He met her eyes. For the first time, he said softly, I'm choosing me. And he walked past her not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the quiet dignity of a man stepping out of the shadow of someone else's leaving. Behind him, Lena didn't call his name. She simply sat there, folded in on herself. As though finally understanding the cost of her silence, the house felt strangely hollow the moment Evan made up his mind. Not because anything had changed physically. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every carefully curated object Lena had chosen still sat exactly where it always had. But because something inside him had finally loosened, for the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of air in a place that had long felt suffocating. He walked down the hallway toward her bedroom. The door was half open, spilling warm light onto the hardwood floor. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing in particular, her shoulders curled slightly inward. She didn't look up when he entered. Evan crossed the room without speaking. His hand went instinctively to the ring on his finger, smooth from years of wearing it, warm from his skin, familiar in a way nothing else in his life felt anymore. He slid it off slowly. The imprint it left on his skin was pale, soft, a small indentation that felt deeper than it looked, as if etched into him by time and loyalty and hope. Lena looked up then. Her eyes widened when she realized what he held. "Evan," she said quietly, breath-catching, almost a plea. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her vanity table, the one cluttered with glimmering jewelry and perfume bottles, arranged like a shrine to the person she chose to become without him. He placed the ring on the polished wooden surface. It made a small sound, barely audible, yet it felt like a thunderclap inside the room. Lena straightened, her face pale. "Please don't do this." He met her eyes. "Lena, you already did." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at the ring as if seeing the end of something she'd never intended to acknowledge fully, something she had let decay in silence until there was nothing left to salvage. Evan stepped back, the weight of the moment settling into him. Not heavy, but grounding, clarifying. He wasn't leaving out of rage. He wasn't leaving out of revenge. He was leaving because staying had become a form of slow erasure, and he had finally chosen to stop disappearing. Lena blinked rapidly. "Where will you go? I don't know," he admitted. "But anywhere is better than being half alive." She exhaled shakily, fingers trembling as they hovered near the ring, but didn't touch it. "I never wanted you to hate me." "I don't," Evan said, and he meant it. "But I can't love someone who walked away long before she told me she was gone." Her face crumpled for a brief second, but the moment passed. She looked down, defeated not dramatically, not with wails or theatrics, but with quiet realization, a recognition of the damage she had caused by pretending everything was fine until she needed it not to be. Evan turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Lena." He didn't wait for her response. When he stepped outside, Charleston greeted him with a warm, humid night breeze that smelled faintly of salt and magnolia. The cicadas hummed in the distance, a steady rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. Steady, alive, patient. Evan inhaled deeply. The air tasted different, not lighter. Exactly. But honest. He walked down the porch steps, each one grounding him further in his decision. He passed the garden beds she'd once proudly tended, now neglected, overrun with small weeds that had grown quietly, persistently, just like everything else, he thought. The sky above was a deep indigo, clouds drifting lazily across the moon. The humidity clung to his skin, but he welcomed it. After months, years of emotional coldness, the warmth felt like a reminder that he was still here, still breathing, still human enough to feel. He reached the sidewalk and paused, looking back at the house. The windows glowed softly, silhouettes shifting behind them. He wondered how long it would take for the house to feel like just a building again, instead of a graveyard of what-ifs. Not long, he hoped. Closing his eyes briefly, he let himself feel it. Grief, relief, anger, sadness, freedom. None of them fought each other. They simply settled inside him, like pieces of a mosaic he hadn't known he was making. He whispered into the night, not to her, not to the house, but to himself. "You made it." It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't a victory cry. It was quiet, steady. The voice of a man who had spent too long drowning in silence. Evan turned away and began walking. He didn't know where he was going. Maybe a motel for the night. Maybe a friend's place. Maybe nowhere in particular. But every step felt like reclaiming something he had lost. Something Lena hadn't taken, but something he'd surrendered long before the garden party. His sense of self, his voice, his right to be chosen. As he walked beneath the glowing streetlights, past the oak trees draped in Spanish moss, he realized something with startling clarity. He didn't need to know what came next. He only needed to know it would be his. Not hers, not theirs. His. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. Evan didn't look back again. The night swallowed him gently humid, warm, alive, carrying him forward into whatever came next. Finally free.